everyone can have an impact on the inspiration level of the team. It's oftentimes someone who's not the most senior person in the group that actually ends up wowing people. People can see these things even if you actually aren't seeing them. And why? Because these are authentic to who you are.
Hello, everyone. This is Ed McGill, the host of the podcast Led Leadership with Ed, and also co-founder and partner at McGill Jungie Wealth Management. I'm continuing my journey on just, the evaluation of leaders and inspiring others. And today we have a special show. Over the time period, I've interviewed probably 20 different people in this inaugural year of Led. And a lot of people ask, well, who's going to interview me? And so today we are inviting Mark Horwitch onto the show. It's going to be a quasi interview in me, but I also want you to understand Mark's background and the work he did for Bain Consulting, strategic global leader. Bain probably has over 20,000 employees now, and Mark ran their entire leadership development. So we have someone that is the best of the best. We're going to have some great useful tools that are going to be that you'll be able to see in the links when you listen to this, whether it be on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. So you're going to get usable tools, and Mark's going to talk about the actual tool that they created to identify leaders and where their strengths are and maybe where some of their weaknesses are. So we're going to spend time on that. We're also going to talk about my rocks. So where did my team put me? So they went through this evaluation, the short version that Mark had given them on mine. So you'll be able to hear a little bit more about me and where some of my leadership skills go. But then we're also going to spend time, we always want to make sure we're answering questions here. We're going to learn what an inspirational leader is and, how inspired do you feel and why that's important. We're going to talk about, can leadership be developed? So when you learn some of these traits that you have, can they actually be improved on? And then just maybe some funny things is, what if you're god awful in some of these areas? And what was Mark's training for not only the Bain partners, but they actually implement this at a lot of the companies that they work with. So we have one of the best leaders and leadership researchers in the country, Mark Horwitch. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. Now you had 44 years at Bain, but on your LinkedIn, it also says you had about a 9-year stint of, becoming CFO, CEO, COO of companies. Was that truly leaving Bain and coming back, or they sent you there for these turnarounds that maybe had poor leadership that needed some help?
Actually, it was a little bit of both. In the beginning, It was me taking a leave of absence as a partner to go take on a couple of these challenges. And that eventually morphed when I came back from one of those into Bain themselves deciding that our approach to transformations and our ability to really create big changes and trajectories for companies could be useful even in the more distressed or turnaround type of situation. And so I helped pioneer Bain actually getting directly into that aspect of our business as well. So it ended up being a combination.
Oh, that's amazing. So you were, a pioneer on that as well as this leadership development. I know there was a team of you doing this, but all the articles I read, your name's listed kind of at the start. Then tell us about your passion on leadership. I've been to Mark's house out in Boulder, Colorado, and he has book after book of leadership on really one whole wall. It's pretty impressive. But was that always there, or is that something you did later on in on your career at Bain? And tell us about the tool that you created.
Sure. Well, it was always an interest of mine, Ed, just in terms of my own personal development and effectiveness. And having the variety of experience that I did in different leadership roles, I think gave me a pretty good perspective on what it actually takes to get things done in a leadership position. Consultants are always teased about the fact that we can tell people what to do, but we don't know how to do it. And I can actually say that I'm a consultant who actually did it too. So I feel like that taught me a lot about some of the things that actually are blind spots, not only for Bain back in the day, but really for a lot of major corporations. And what that really boiled down to
Hey,
was,
real quick, Mark,
yeah.
did you really learn that when you left to go be CEO, CFO, or was that some of the things you were seeing when you were consulting, or was it more the epiphany once you got placed at companies that you started to see and be able to say, look, I've been in both seats, the consultant and the actual person making the decisions?
I'd say it was a bit more of an epiphany when I went to do my first turnaround gig. I had been at Bain for about 8 years. I had been kind of a fairly quick promotion to partner there. So I was doing a lot of work with CEOs and C-level, C-suite executives, in my clients, and kind of observing how they did things and parsing that into
Yep.
some insights. But when I actually was in the seat, I really did have the epiphany that you can't just be competent at the job itself. I left Bain to be a CEO of a very distressed situation, and I knew a lot of stuff. I knew a lot of analytical approaches. I knew how to figure out what I thought the right answer was.
Yep.
And I just kind of had an assumption, which I came to realize is a blind spot for many senior executives and their teams. I came in there assuming that if I was really smart and I got the right answer and I was incredibly persuasive analytically, that it would be obvious to everyone else that that's what we ought to go do. And that my ability to just show that I knew all that stuff would be enough to really motivate people. And of course, in a restructuring or turnaround situation, you're sort of in an extreme scenario where the existing leadership team has either been unable to figure out what they needed to do or been hit by things that were beyond their capability, or something obviously went a little bit wrong. But even without that extreme situation, it became obvious to me that you need to actually be able to inspire the people around you to go to, first of all, to listen, second of all, to ultimately, hopefully, agree, and then to actually be willing to do the hard things they need to do to change what they're doing and do something different. And that there was something that you needed to be able to bring to them besides just the hard facts if you're really going to get them to do that well. And so that got me started really on the journey, particularly when I went back to Bain and was thinking about, we have our job at Bain is to assist and collaborate with high performing executive teams to make fairly significant changes. You don't hire a firm like Bain, McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group if you're just trying to do incremental things. It's very expensive and disruptive. So
not good use of the dollar, if that's the
not
case.
a very good investment. And most senior executives are not are actually pretty good at knowing when it's worth making a big investment or not. But they also expect to get a good return. So you don't get a good return if you don't actually get people to change. And that means that the ability to marry up what we ultimately called performance-related skill sets, which are those competencies that any leader needs to have in the realm that they're being put in a leadership position in. They have to have those, call it the hard skills, to be able to do that well. That's kind of table stakes, especially if you want to be a high performer. But what you also need is what we ended up calling the inspirational skill set, which is why we called the program Inspirational Leadership. And that's really where you start to get into the softer issues around how do you actually motivate people? How do you trigger their intrinsic motivation? How do you get that extra discretionary energy that's needed if you're really going to perform at your maximum? And is that something that is just an accident, i.e., if you're the leader, you happen to somehow have been born with some version of what people might call charisma or, an outgoing extroverted personality? Or should it be considered in the same realm as your as your performance skills, i.e., should it be viewed as a set of skills that one could identify and choose to make the investment to develop in themselves, such that you can take any group of leaders, and this is where we ended up going down that journey originally at Bain. We wanted all of our leaders to be able to be not only be great on the performance side, but be very effective on the inspirational side, because we felt that would be in the best interest of our clients.
Real quick, Mark, what's interesting, so a couple things there when, Mark talked about credibility and going into the room. One of the big traits you'll see Mark write a lot about is, being a humble leader. And what's interesting, we've had, and I know people that are writing leadership books and they got big followings and different things. Mark's one of those under the radar ones because, he was doing it within companies and individuals. And I think you had was it 20,000 data points in your database and the different pieces that you've done.
Yep.
But most of you probably have never heard, Mark or know of him. And so to me, it's always cool when someone says, no, I made the impact, but it was at a level where it was impacting companies and individuals. And then the other thing he said before we get into, what they actually created is, if you're just looking to make incremental or have incremental growth, you really don't need to do that much. It could be just as lucky as you landed, if you're in sales, one more account, or, instead of 4 appointments a day, you did 4.2, or, you can have those incremental changes, but you're not going to have transformational change or 10x in it without really saying, I'm investing differently, I'm thinking differently, and I'm going to make some fundamental changes to how I view my practice. And, that's really what Mark helped the companies on. You talked about an inspirational leader. How is that different than just any other leader? And then let's talk about, the inspirational leader elements, the 4 quadrants, and then the stuff you put together, because that is, for all of you out there, that is going to be in the links. Tell us how you developed this in these quadrants and these rocks.
Well, it's an interesting question, because when you ask somebody intellectually, define inspiration, people will come up with a variety of different definitions, kind of dictionary definitions. But if you think about what inspiration actually is, it's a feeling that is generated inside of you based on being in some form of relationship with someone else.
Oh, that's awesome. Say that again. That was really, really good. That's the first time I've heard that.
So inspiration is a feeling that's generated inside of a human based on having some type of relationship and interaction with someone else. So it's part of being human. It's related to having some type of interaction, some definition of relationship. It could be one-on-one. It could be one-on-many. For example, I would guess if you think about public type figures, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, name the public figure that you might personally have felt inspired by at some point in time. You probably never met them, more than likely. But somehow, but in fact, they were creating a relationship with tens, hundreds, millions of people through the expression of who their authentic self is, which are the actions that they take, the way that they communicate, something about them that is so visible to anybody having the experience of interacting with them, even if it's remote or indirect. And if you think about that phenomenon, what that means is that you can't approach the topic, as our conclusion was, you can't approach the topic of inspiration by taking your opinion of who might be X inspirational individual or X group of individuals, applying your own filter of what you believe they all have in common in some way in their behaviors or their traits, and then asserting that that is a universal archetype that everyone must emulate if they want to be successful at being more inspirational. which when you look at one of the reasons I have all those books is I collected a huge number. If anybody Googles on Amazon, inspiration or leadership, you'll see book after book after book
Yep.
where the approach has essentially been that qualitative assessment of the author and a search for some sort of simple archetype.
Or duplication of that. If that person has this, I should be that.
And that the development goal for any individual should be you must turn yourself into more of that. And when you think about that at a very personal level, if you reflect, and I would urge everybody watching this to take a second to do this, reflect on someone who inspired you in your life. Doesn't have to be at work, or it could be in any setting. And what was it about them that gave you that feeling of inspiration? And I don't need to know how you define that feeling. I just need to know that you felt inspired in whatever way that works for you. And if you do that self-reflection, even very briefly and rapidly, what you'll find is that, first of all, there are a lot of people that you've interfaced with in your life who've made you feel inspired.
Yep.
And they are about as different as night and day over time as you can imagine. So this idea that there's only one or two or a handful of archetypes of inspirational behavior or traits that can inspire people just does not match our individual experiences if you really think about it for a minute.
So that should, real quick, that should give everyone hope that
Absolutely.
there are so many different types of leaders that can inspire, or they have different traits that are going to be able to inspire, that you don't have to aspire to inspire the same way, because you also, I heard you mention earlier, someone that was inspiring you most of the time is because they're being their authentic self. And if you're
Absolutely.
not being yourself, then people will see right through that. But the good news is there's multiple characteristics and traits that will
Absolutely.
provide that inspiration.
Absolutely. So being an analytical business, the questions that we had to ask then, Ed, were number one, well, how do you measure if someone is inspired or not? And how do you begin to understand out of the entire realm of potential human behaviors, which philosophers and theologians and psychologists and sociologists have been studying forever.
Yep.
Is there a way to identify a subset, let's say, of all the possible human behaviors out there, or human traits that could inspire any given individual? Is there a way to identify a set of those that is analytically valid in representing the set of attributes that could broadly inspire, a large group of people? That was the initial question we started with. And the way that we decided to answer that, Ed, was through some research that would be familiar to anybody watching this that has worked in consumer products. And we said, well, if you think about it, what we're really trying to do is deliver a product to any given person. That product is a feeling of inspiration that in them that they would identify as a feeling inspired. And like any other consumer product, there are attributes in being delivered to them by the person that they're being communicated to or led by. There are attributes being delivered to them, product attributes, and we'd like to know what those are. And there's a very well-used consumer research methodology called conjoint analysis, where you ask a person on the dependent side, what are you receiving from using this product? Let's say it's soap. And they say, cleanliness.
Yeah.
In this case, we asked people, how inspired do you feel when you're working with or interacting with person X? And this was, of course, internal at Bain in the beginning. And someone will say, well, I feel, 0 or 5 on a 0 to 5 scale, 5 being I feel very inspired, 0 being not much. And then through the research that we did in all of those realms I described earlier, we had a list of about 75 or 80 attributes, human attributes or relationship-oriented attributes in people, things like empathy, listening, some of the ones that are more familiar to people,
Yep.
but some that were less familiar, like co-creation or emotional expression and some other things. So many of those books you mentioned were also from the realm of psychology, sociology, philosophy, where we gathered all of these concepts together. And then what we did through this conjoint analysis is we asked the person taking the survey, or the recipient, let's say, of inspiration, we asked them to actually rate those and rank order them. And that's done through a certain methodology that doesn't mean they take all 75 things and put them on a list, but it takes them through a process where the ultimate statistical outcome is you get an absolute level of importance to the group that you're surveying, and you also get a relative level of importance from that group you're surveying out of those elements.
So real quick then, so you had the 75, and now
did.
I know you've come down to 32 or 33. Is that correct?
Correct. We came down to 32. And so out of that research, we said, what we want to know is, and this was the one judgment call we made, we said, our goal is to understand what inspires people broadly, meaning if you have a large group of people that you're going to be interacting with, whether they be all at once or over time, we would like the odds to be as high as possible that you have what it takes to really to potentially inspire each of those people. You don't know what that's actually going to be for them at any given time, but you want to be able to do it hopefully with a high probability. And so what we said is we are going to take that research and we are going to say which of those 75 was meaningful enough, based on this survey work, was meaningful enough to have someone say that they felt inspired. And we did that, and we said we want that to be applicable to at least 20% of the respondents, 20% or more.
Okay,
So
that's how you narrowed it down.
We want at least a 1 out of 5 shot, and that was the cutoff we made. And by making that cutoff, the 32 elements that are now represented on that inspirational leadership element model were what came out of that cutoff. As you pointed out, there's actually 33 on the page, and the extra one is called centeredness, which is all about, can you actually show up as your best self, fully present in any moment, every moment that matters. And in particular, as a leader, you get very few chances in many cases to have a serious interaction with someone.
Yep.
You need to make that interaction count. And that means being fully centered, which actually was the number one highest rated element, by the way. So we decided to include that one no matter what. And then we picked the next 32 underneath that.
So there's these 4 quadrants: the developing leadership elements, connecting with others, leading the team, and then setting the tone. And what Kim had done is she had sent these 32 plus the one in the middle to all the team and said, rate, where you would pick Ed in, I think it was the top 4 that you would see. And then we could just see where the team found me. Now, I happen to have one in each quadrant, which you said is not necessarily the goal. But you said I did have some spikies. And so let's talk about the spikies, and then I'll tell everyone where I fell, or you can tell them where I fell.
Yeah, for sure. So the spikes that you're referring to were the second part of the research work that we did. And
see, I knew that. That was the lead-in question right there. So that was.
Thank you for that. After we answered the question, or we felt we had answered the question of what is the universe, or at least the reasonably defined universe of features or traits that could inspire someone, the next logical question, to your point, is, well, if there's 32 of those, that's a lot. Like, can anybody really do that? Even if you think about some of the most inspiring people, in the public realm, it's highly unlikely that they're off the charts on all 32 of these things.
Yep.
And remember, this is a relative game. So they're experiencing you relative to other people that they're experiencing. And in people's minds, they're kind of putting you in a peer group, of if I'm a CEO, they're going to say, well, of all the CEOs or very senior executives I've interacted with or heard talk or whatever, how does Mark stand out, or how does Ed stand out? So we again had this idea from personal experience that the way this really works is that someone has to have some of these things that we called them distinguishing strengths. A simpler way to think about it is they're really spiky.
Yep.
They're so strong in you that they're kind of obvious even from a very short interaction, or even from just watching you speak on a video or something. So the question then was, well, if you know that you need to have some spikes, how many spikes does it really take to hit that goal of trying to have a high probability of being inspirational, or think about it another way, to be inspirational across a broad range of constituents? And so having asked the question in our initial research, which was a survey of about 4,000 people at Bain, by the way, about 70% went to the trouble of taking the survey, which for anyone who's ever done survey work is kind of astounding.
Yeah, that's actually a very high percentage for those of you on this call.
Which you're lucky to get 5 or 10 on any kind of survey, and these are difficult ones. So that kind of told us we were onto something that people really valued and wanted. But in any event, we had the survey results that said, how inspired did you feel by person X? And we knew from the survey, from the rankings that people gave them in the survey, how they rated that person on all 32 of those elements, and how highly they were rated relative to, let's say, the average of the database. So we defined a spike as if your personal score across your average score you got from your respondents was in the top 10% relative to the average of the whole group, that counted as a spike. And then all we had to do was say, okay, let's look at the people who were rated highly inspiring, let's say a 4.5 or a 5 on that 5-point scale.
Yeah.
How many of those 32 did they have as spikes in their profile? And guess what we found? We found that people who had as few as 4 of those 32 spiking, 92% of the respondents said they felt inspired by that individual. So we created a metaphor, and we said, well, those are your inspirational strengths, with those spikes, and for purposes of metaphorical learning, we're going to call that a rock pile, because a rock pile represents something that is a strong foundation. It's also something that if you're a hiker, it's a trail marker for where you want to go, right? Which kind of gets to the development goals that can come out of using the system. But the analytical finding was 4 of these distinguishing strengths out of these 32 on an individual level will make you broadly inspirational with very high probability of success.
See, and that's awesome, because when I did this now we did the short version, and so I imagine the long version, there were a lot of partners at Bain and other people like going, okay, I'm one of that 70%. What's this going to say? Is it going to reflect on my job performance? So I'm sure there was a little bit of just angst, and maybe some viewed it as an opportunity, but it was pretty cool when I said that I had, 4 of the spikies,
Mm-hmm.
with Optimism, which was number 1, the vision was number 2, development, which we'll talk about that because that was not a strength of mine previously. Yes. And then I had like 2 or 3 that tied the shared ambition, recognition, and then just vitality,
I think it was.
On that side then too. So I got to say, my team, and maybe because they knew I was going to talk about in the podcast, they gave me some benefit of the doubt, but we definitely had some common themes that were coming up, which, once I did that and saw that, I was like, okay, that's good. So what if someone does have 4 that or 4 or 3 that really stand out, and then 3 that were tied but still, spikes compared to some of the others? What does someone do with that then? Is that where they spend all their time now focusing on that? Or is that, hey, those are good, need to work on these other ones? Tell us a little bit how you use the data then.
Yeah. The data was very clear, Ed, that developing and let's call it continuing to strengthen those things that are already in your portfolio. And in some cases, they may already be at the top of the list on the Spiky scale.
Yep.
And in some cases, they may be partway there, but they're definitely higher than average. And one of the exciting things to your point about being optimistic was that there's almost no one, in fact, there is no one that is in our database today that doesn't at least have one or two of these 32 that are above average, let's call it. I think you asked me when we talked about this one of the first times.
Yeah, what if someone doesn't show up on any of them?
Is it possible that someone has zero or everything is sort of in the weakness category? And I guess I've not seen it in our database, and not surprising because we're normally doing this with people that have had some measure of success in management and leading people. But you would have to say that a person like that would probably literally be a sociopath or something akin to that, because what you're really talking about, if you look at all 32 of these elements, every single one of them is involved with a relationship with another human. None of these, you don't do any of these by yourself, essentially. So if you can't do any of these with another human, you would kind of have to define that as someone who really can't get along with anybody, which would probably be pretty low on the scale. I'm not a psychiatrist, but I would think that would be bad.
You know, as I think about the mine, and then maybe, you know, what you saw with others, it seems to me like optimism and vision for a lot of people would be tied fairly strong together, because I am naturally optimistic. And then, you know, the vision, I think one of the reasons why McGill Jungie has done so well is, you know, Ross and I, who are the co-founders and partners, is, you know, we're kind of like a yin and a yang. Like, he does tend to have more operator or implementation in him, but he does have some actually more visionary than I thought. And I tend to be more visionary, and I don't always like to be on the operation side. I can go there when I need to, but I'm more, hey, I can see where we're going. And I think to be a visionary, you have to be a little bit, or have optimism in you. Is that correct? Or did you ever see where they didn't show up together?
It's not mandatory that they be linked together. What we found in our database, if you take the top 25% most inspiring people in our database now, so call that, you know, several thousand executives, both Bain, internal Bain and client executives. And you look at their profile of strengths, some of them may only have one or two. Most of them tend to be in the 3 to 4 category starting out. Some of them potentially have more. But having more than 4 doesn't actually buy you a lot in terms of that probability percentage. It starts to flatten out.
It's kind of like a bell curve. It just, you know, if you had that 2, 3, 4, you were in a good spot. Yeah,
exactly. That's kind of the sweet spot. That's the steep part of the curve, as we would say. Yep. But what's fascinating is among that 3,000 or 4,000 people in the database that are rated in the highest category of inspiration, there is not one duplicate profile of Spikes, not one duplicate. And if you think about it, it doesn't matter if there was a duplicate. That doesn't hurt anything. But what's great, and I think super energizing from a humanity standpoint about these statistical outcomes is, for the mathematicians that might be watching this, if you ask how many unique permutations are there of 4 or more out of 32 choices, the answer is 3-point-something billion. So
okay, that just blew my mind that you just said 3.6 billion, because I would have thought, like, out of all of that top 25, like, I don't know, some percentage all would have been the same. And you're saying not a single one. And that gives hopes to people.
Not a single exact duplicate, which is, as you said, it's incredibly hopeful. What it really does statistically is prove the point you made earlier, which is everybody has the ability to be inspirational. The issue is not to try and mold yourself to match somebody else. The issue is find out who your authentic self really is, partially by asking people, what are they getting from you, which we really don't very often do. Some executives in particular feel scared sometimes. They don't want to be told that they have a high degree of emotional expression because they've been trained, or they think that that makes them weak. You're weak if you show emotion. People in the communication business would actually obviously tell you the exact opposite. To be a great communicator, the more emotion, authentic emotion you can put into what you're communicating, the more effective your communication will be. So there's a lot of misconceptions, fears, and just incorrect assumptions that people make about what it takes to be inspirational. So this idea is that the key, as you mentioned, to development then is start out first understanding where you are already. Almost everybody has within them already, especially people who have moved from, let's say, an individual contributor to a leader of any kind of group. And it could be a small team. It could be something in your community, at school. Anybody who's moved beyond just being an individual contributor almost certainly has some of these that are already spiking. But they may not have spent much time trying to understand what those are. They may not have actually let themselves have the validation that those, in fact, are seen and appreciated by others. And so the first step of the personal development side of this is understand where you're starting from. Then understand that the effectiveness, making those more effective for you in your goal to become more inspirational, more influential, is to first make sure that you are actually utilizing those strengths and making them visible.
Yep.
And again, a lot of people feel inhibited by that. Sometimes it's because they don't even know what they are. So they don't even have the thought process in their mind as they're going into a given interaction. They're about to sit down to give a performance review. They're about to walk into an update meeting with their team. They're about to give some sort of keynote speech. They don't necessarily take just a little bit of time, even when you start to use this, to reflect and say, gosh, I'm actually really good at vision in your case. How can I make sure that in this instance, as much as I can, given the opportunity that's in front of me, how can I make sure that I bring my view on vision in this circumstance, out? How do I make sure it's out there? And you can do that for any given one of these 32 elements if you're aware of it, first of all, and then you spend a little bit of time thinking about it. So the first development goal is to take what you've got and build on it. It's a bit of the strength-based learning philosophy that's been out there in many other settings.
And it's not only to not only build on it, it's to recognize that is a strength. And if you're up and coming, instead of saying, well, I don't really have opportunities to utilize that, what you're saying is, well, look at your current role, what you're currently doing. Like I look at just some of them, whether it be listening or, servanthood or, responsibility. At any role, you could implement or show that to the other team members. If you think of any even small group, even if you're the first person, is like, man, Mark is always on time. Mark always responds. Mark is always a participant. Mark never has his phone on during these meetings, which we just heard Jamie Dimon talk about. He's very responsible, so you could show that. The listening you could show. I mean, there's so many of these that regardless, and I think, think back to your career, because we'll come back to your stuff, but I'm thinking of, young people up and coming. Is it just demonstrating it? Is it raising their hand? How do they get others to notice that? Because you also don't want to say, I'm a great listener in the meeting, because like, well, no, you're not. You're talking.
Yeah.
How do you find opportunities as you're coming up?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And just as an aside, at Bain, every single employee goes through this program. It's not just for the people who are the structural leaders. And it's for that exact reason that you pointed out, that especially if you're working in a team-oriented environment, which of course consulting is, everyone can have an impact on the inspiration level of the team. And in fact, and I know this again, if you think about personal experience, it's oftentimes someone who's not the most senior person in the group that actually ends up wowing people with their ability to get people excited and motivated about something that that group is going to do. And I'm sure everyone has experienced that. So it's the two tricks, I guess, to answer your question that we try and teach people. The first one is to understand, because if they took the survey, they've seen it, is that people can see these things even if you actually aren't necessarily aren't seeing them. And why? Because these are authentic to who you are. So just the understanding that I'm gonna make sure that I'm okay with that in my own self. I'm actually proud and excited that that's who I am. I'm not going to try and create a fake persona in this group, or hopefully any group, and that in and of itself will allow these things to shine through, particularly over an extended, period of interactions. That's one learning point. The other learning point is, we call it, in our training, we have a mnemonic called Take 5. And what that means is take 5 minutes before as you're prepping for whatever the interaction is that you're going to do. Just take 5 minutes, which most people find is more than they need when they start to do it. And think about the setting. Think about what you're bringing into that setting. Think about what your role is in that meeting or that interaction, and just make a plan. Make a plan for how might I be able to utilize one of the things that I already know is one of my strengths. But even if I don't see an easy opportunity to use one of those, pick any of the other 32, because any of those will have that impact. Even if that doesn't happen to be your towering strength, if you can bring a little bit of that into play, that's going to make a huge difference. And to your point, and to your earlier point, from a development standpoint, Ed, these are not mutually exclusive elements, because human nature is not cut and dried. So there are many, they're not exact overlaps, but there are synergies between some of these elements. And so that's another thing that we encourage people that are trying to proactively use this as a development tool to think about, is your example. If you're optimistic, it's easier to potentially express a vision that's going to give energy to people and feel good. Even if designing a vision, or even if articulating a vision isn't one of your current strengths, if you're in a situation where you're going to be talking about, what's the goal here, think about the fact that maybe you're actually really good on optimism. So say to yourself, if I think about, and you don't even have to, this is not an totally intellectual exercise. I understand what the vision is that has been laid out to us. It's sort of been described by the leader. Which part of that, how do I react to that given my sense of optimism? And two people can look at the exact same situation, but somebody who spikes on optimism is going to describe the potential benefit of that situation very differently than someone else who isn't spiking on optimism. And neither one is wrong, but if you're doing it using kind of cross-training or leveraging your optimism muscle, you're going to be your communication of that vision is going to be more inspiring than you might even give yourself credit for.
No, that's interesting, because as you were describing that, talking through that, I was thinking of two things. One, as a leader, so if you are in a leadership position already, are you giving opportunities to those to actually let these things come out? So I think about, we're blessed here at McGill-Jungie. We have such great young professional talent. And, I think about even just our internship program that Melissa ran that 3 years ago, was part of her leadership development, her first step into, running an actual important part of the firm, because that's where the new talent comes. And then Kayla running that the next year, and then Isaiah and Jared ran it last summer. They're going to run it again this summer, and it is part of their leadership development. So as a leader, it's important to not only let people, when they do want to share or show some of these things, but also how do you put them in some opportunities to shine and develop and or just learn what are their skills. And then the second one, maybe tied to, someone scores not great, it's not spiky, or can you work on, these, because development came up very high for me, but that would not have been, I think, high 6-7 years ago, and even before that, because, when you first start running your own business, that I did on my own for a while, and then Ross and I came together in 2013, a lot of it was, hey, let's make this work. Let's make this work. And it was Ross that did a really good job of saying, Ed, the more we pour into Scott and Trent and develop them and getting them to where they want to go, then that'll allow the firm to grow, exponentially. And then it just kept kind of cascading down from there. And so I've seen the development of others, but probably 7, 8, 9 years ago, I'm not sure that would have showed up high from other people, about me. So it looks like, in my opinion, that's one that's been developed with some good urging from Ross on the importance of that and his
absolutely
strong EQ. But is that true of ones that maybe didn't really have any, not really negative marks, but really no positive marks either, that, hey, that's one I really want to work on because I think it will impact my team?
Yes. So going back to the rock pile metaphor, the trail marker, right? If you don't have, or if you choose to want to develop any of these skills more into the sort of the higher ratings, that's a choice of where are you going to put the focus and attention for your own personal and professional development. And so you can choose that as one of your rocks, as a marker for yourself to say, I'm going to spend some time. I'm going to maybe read some stuff about what does this actually look like in practice. At Bain, we actually have learning modules on every single one of these elements that are interactive on our online learning program and in some of our face-to-face training. So as I said earlier, these are all skills. They're literally, just like you could say, if I've been now promoted to a new position that requires me to learn, I'll use my case because you'll see how out of current touch I am. If I need to really get good at using Excel, because I just got put in a job where I have to create forecasts, and it's going to be a lot easier for me if I use Excel and not pencil and paper. Okay, so I can choose to spend time to learn how to be better at Excel. It's exactly the same with these inspirational skills. I can choose to want to make myself better at XYZ of these, but unlike Excel, to learn how to do that, and this is maybe something that you can comment on as you went through that learning process yourself on development, you have to decide that you're going to behave in a certain way. You're going to have to think about what exactly does it mean for me to bring more development to someone that I'm trying to mentor. Then you have to do it. Then you have to go through the reflective, kind of reinforced, self-directed, experiential learning loop of being observant. How did that land with the person I'm trying to develop? What worked, what didn't? But also, how did it land in me? How did I feel as I was doing it? And I think I'll urge everybody watching this, if they can think about what might be some of their spikes. When you're actually doing that, I will bet you will, if you reflect on it, you'll say, that makes me feel really good when I do that. I'm kind of in the zone when I'm doing that. I want to do more of that. Not only that, but I see and feel what a positive effect that has on the people that I'm doing it with. That also makes me feel good, but makes them feel good, which makes both of us want to do more. So it creates this self-reinforcing learning cycle, but it all starts with being self-aware. And that's a little bit where the centeredness comes in, because if you're showing up in any given if you're showing up, let's say, for a development discussion with one of your subordinates, and you come in just, totally pissed off, you're
Guns a-blazing. Yep.
you're just, all you're thinking about is how bad the last meeting went or what somebody did to you, and how do you think that's actually going to make that interaction go?
Yeah.
And how much do you think you're going to have the mind share to actually be thinking about, okay, I'm now in a development situation. This has nothing to do with the meeting I just came out of. This person is looking at me right now and going to feel whether I care about this or I don't care about this, whether I'm really interested in their development or I'm just going through the motions. So centeredness is a really core skill to also practice and bring to the table, particularly if you're trying to develop something that's not yet at that super high inherent level, because you have to work harder to build a skill than you do to just do something that has now begun to come naturally. So I would guess that now when you sit down to do development based on what you said, you don't have to do a whole lot of thinking ahead of time about, do I know what I want to say? Do I know how to watch this person and be able to really understand if it's landing or not? Because you've kind of built that muscle up. It's just like training any other skill. And so and that's why, to your point about also helping other people have opportunities, we encourage in an organizational setting. This is very useful as an individual. You can learn a lot. You can do quite a bit to help yourself and others by just being kind of in this thought process yourself. It's 100 times more powerful if every member in the group that you're involved with is also engaged. If they understand this framework, if you have all told each other, because based on whatever feedback mechanism you want to use, even if it starts just with a self-assessment, if you sit down and share with your team, here's my rock pile. I'm interested in knowing what all of your rock piles are. Why? Two reasons. One, I want you to give me feedback when you see me doing a good job on these, because it's important to me. It matters to me. I also want to do the same when I see you doing it, which if you think about the impact of a senior person going into a team, and you've got maybe some brand new, analysts that just joined the firm, and the partner says to them, I'm actually interested in who you are on these. I'm not just interested in the fact that you're an analyst level 2, which is incredibly dehumanizing. When I hate it when people come in and say, well, hey, I'm about to start work with Mark, tell me about him. Oh, well, Mark's a really strong, manager level 1. It's like, no, he's not. He's actually a human being. Let's start with that. So if everybody is involved, if you have all of your team members liking and using this process, everybody can support each other in providing opportunity, to your point, if you're in charge of asking people to do certain things, which can make a team incredibly strong, a much more high-performing team, by the way. If you've tried to allocate tasks out or opportunities to influence to people where they're going to be playing to their strengths, you're going to get a better outcome. It's kind of obvious when you think about it a little bit, rather than just randomly assigning things, or even worse, assuming that because I'm the most senior and most experienced person, I have the best answer to everything.
Well, and I think because we got a couple more minutes here, I wanted to come to one last question before that is, you heard about how Bain made this training curriculum and people could go in there. And then Mark just talked about, if you did this with all of the team members, and that's why we're putting these things into, you'll have access to them, in the links in the chat. And, we did the short version, which was just, hey, which one of these best represents Ed on there. So it could be something as simple as that. But a couple of things is you do need to be thoughtful, and you do need to put time into this. Yes. I mean, if you're going to develop others, you're going to develop yourself. It is just part of like your daily task, or however you're going to do that. Be careful with daily task. If you're trying to develop others, if I had one person, like every Monday they'd call, leave a voicemail to ask how I'm doing, hope you have a good week. And I soon realized that, wait a minute, that call comes at the same time every Monday. Yeah. you don't want to make it rote, because then I'm like, that's not authentic.
Correct.
And then I think the other piece is, with anything, is that if you make it a priority, you can develop better leaders, which makes for better outcomes, better team members on that side. And really, you said, you were talking about where people can be authentic and they feel good in the meetings. I wrote down, as you said that, two things. One, there's a great old video by Gene Stallings, coach of Alabama, called The Huddle. And when you're in the huddle, he just talked about how, there is no kind of hierarchy. It's like, can you help our team win? And everyone's gone through the same two-a-days and gone through the same pain and just, skin color, race, creed, religion, etc. None of that matters. It's, doing things for the benefit of the team. And I've always loved, a guy named Yogi had said, the best bonds happen on the locker room floors, whether it be high school football, basketball, or the locker room floors where, it's after the game and you're pulling off your equipment and you're just talking to your buddies. And that's when the coaches, when they're in there with you, talking and building relationships. You talked about, do you have those relationships? And so, that's just key. My last question to you, Mark, though, out of all the leaders that you've seen and worked with, is there one or two from companies or that inspired you that you didn't really know, but you said that person's a great leader? Who comes to mind out of maybe some of the named people out there or people you ran across that were some of the best leaders that you saw?
Well, not to over-index on Bain, but the reason I joined Bain and changed my career from a budding architect to a strategy consultant was because of him. At the time, Bain was pretty much of a startup, and so of course he had many of those attributes of founders in terms of the vision for the firm. But he was also one of the most introverted individuals I'd ever seen, and yet whenever I had an interaction with him, which as a brand new junior person, once he talked me into joining the firm, I almost never saw him face to face. But I observed him, of course, as he talked to the whole company,
Yeah.
and I had a couple of interactions. And despite the fact that he was a huge introvert, every time he spoke, I just found myself being rapt attention on what he was saying. And of course, I didn't know what that meant at the time, kind of intellectually, but as I've applied this methodology, this is a game I would encourage everybody to play, kind of like Where's Waldo, is when you feel something special from someone, pull out this piece of paper, not necessarily right in front of them, but when you get a chance, see if you can see what their spikes are. And in retrospect, his spikes, to me, he was incredibly high on independence, focus, and listening, and emotional expression. So he hardly ever said anything, but the way he said it, when he said it, what you knew in your core that was very, very important to him personally. Right? And
and when he's talking, it probably felt like he was talking directly to you, even though there was a big group.
Absolutely. And so, obviously many, many years later, Bill Bain has passed away many years ago, but having grown up through the culture that he started, it's in hindsight, you can look back and see how those attributes initially attracted a group of people to want to put in all the hard work to do what he was doing in pioneering this approach to strategy consulting. And, 44 years later, Bain has gone from 100 people when I joined to, as you said, about 17,000 today. And many of the elements that are strong in the Bain culture are those exact attributes that he had, even though he never wrote them down, never told anybody, that they need to go do that. So it does influence the culture of a company ultimately as well, particularly if you're leading a young company or a startup, which I think is a super important lesson that we try and get put in the heads of our Gen Y and Gen Z,
Yep.
younger people at Bain, because many of them have the aspiration to go be found startups or go have a huge impact in the social impact world. And so we hope that they learn at Bain, if they're going to go do that, that this set of inspirational skills and the authenticity that underlies them is really actually going to be critical if they want to do the big things that they feel like they want to do.
They want to do. Well, and that's actually an incredible story to end on, because I love where, Mark said that, he was an introvert, and it goes back to the original piece that leaders come in so many shapes, sizes, forms. And so hopefully people found inspiration that you can be your authentic self, find the things that, drive and motivate you, know that that's your rock pile and build on those. And then really just say, what other rocks do I want to move in here? What else is going to help? How can I make this firm, this company, this team better than two? So, Mark, it was truly a pleasure to have you on here today. Again, one of the greatest, thought leaders on leadership in the country. And I know people are going to get tremendous benefit and value from some of the things that we're going to put into the links there as well too. So I just want to thank you for being on the show today. That was awesome. And for everyone out there, wanted to thank you for joining again, Led Leadership with Ed. It drops every other Wednesday. And just love that you're on here. If you like the leadership tips, just make sure you like, comment, share, etc. But always have a great time learning from the best. And Mark, you are definitely one of them. So thank you very much for being here today, my friend.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.